Hello, my name is Dr. Zoe Baker and I'm a Research Fellow in the Department of Education at the University of York. And since 2021, I have been leading a research project on care experience graduates. The project is funded by the British Academy and it is ongoing until 2024. And in this video, I'm going to introduce the study before providing a very general overview of the Phase 1 findings. After this, I'm going to show some evidence from the project in the form of participants' narratives and the recommendations for local authorities that have arisen from these. Just to provide a bit of context around the project, what the project aims to do is to explore the transition out of higher education for care experience graduates. I was really interested in researching this because many graduates generally will have an opportunity to undergo what we call a boomerang transition, where they leave university but return to live in the parental home while they find their feet, decide what they want to do or find a job. But many care experienced people don't have that option. I'm also interested in exploring what influenced care experience graduates' decisions and choices about what they wanted to do after they've graduated. And I was really interested in the role of their own care history within this. So how does this influence what kinds of employment they want to go into, or if they want to go on to further study, for instance, what they view as valuable and important to do once they've graduated. And I'm also exploring what constrains and also what enables care experience graduates to realising the goals that they've set out for themselves to complete once they've graduated. The project is made up of 3 phases. So phase 1 was completed last year, and this is what the report that I'm basing this video on was covering. So this involved interviewing 23 final year higher education care experience students across England and Scotland. My research is based across England and Scotland. And then phase 2, this was completed just in January of this year, where I revisited the same participants 6 months after graduation. There will be a phase 2 report released this summer. And then phase 3 will be completed this summer, just as the phase 2 report is released. And in this, I'll be revisiting participants 12 months after graduation. And there will also be a final report following phase 3, which should be out this winter or early 2024. So the phase 1 report, which is shown here on this slide, includes over 50 recommendations, but these are targeted at various different places. So some of them are targeted at higher education institutions, some are targeted to local authorities, some are relevant for employers, and others are relevant for policymakers. And all of these recommendations intend to create equitable graduate transitions for care experienced people. 12 of these 50 recommendations are targeted at local authorities, and I'm going to focus on some of these today, but not all of them, but some of the core recommendations for local authorities. If someone was to ask me what is the key finding from phase 1, if I had to just give one, it would be the absence of safety nets. This underpinned all of the other concerns and constraints that the participants raised about preparing to graduate from university, the transition out, finding employment, finding accommodation. This absence of safety nets underpinned all of this and their feelings about it. So they were acutely aware that many of their peers could return to their parents after graduation and that they did not have this option. And this resulted in them feeling as though they were facing a care cliff edge. So whilst many of them were very well supported by their universities, so quite a number of them received generous bursaries from their universities and also accommodation support from their universities, this was all going to fall away when they left. And a number of participants explained that their local authorities had stated that they were either going to dramatically reduce the support that they were being offered once they graduated, or they were going to remove support altogether once they graduated. This led to a concern around financial precarity and housing instability as they were coming up to graduation. And it also led to some risk aversion as well. So whilst the majority of participants were very ambitious about what they wanted to do, due to all of these concerns around the absence of safety nets, some of them were a bit risk averse to taking a chance on a particular job, for instance. So some had mentioned how they were going to return to work in previous part-time jobs, like bar work or in shops, because it was safe, it was a safer option, whereas that's not really what they wanted to do, and they were quite overqualified for those positions. Just to demonstrate this with a bit of evidence from the project and from other research, some research that was done by Stone et al. Explained by looking at data from the British Household Panel Survey that completing higher education was one of the strongest determinants of returning to the parental home. Now, care experienced people, or many of them, don't have that option, so it becomes a problem there. And Kaplan found that returning to the parental home was common in precarious times. So when people lost their jobs, they would return to the parental home. So it can protect against labour market risk. And I think even though this research was done in 2012, which I can't believe was 11 years ago now, this is really relevant to mention in the context of cost of living crisis and also the economic fallout from COVID-19, where a number of students graduating over the past year have mentioned to me that it was quite difficult to find employment and it was intensely competitive. And quite a powerful quote that I'm showing at the bottom of this slide is from one of the politics students on the project, and she explains that about her peers that they can go home to their parents. I can't just try something and it fail. If it fails, then that's my life, that's my home, there's that risk. I don't have people to fall back on. So I think that this quote just really summarises this sense of an absence of safety net and it being inherently more risky for care experienced people as they're going through their transitions out of higher education. Some universities have tried to address these concerns by extending accommodation contracts through the summer and also providing graduate bursaries to care experienced students. The second one is less common. I've not come across many institutions providing graduate bursaries. But there still becomes a point when students need to leave university, and this is at the point where the higher education support falls away and where stepping back in by the local authority can be very helpful, particularly to those without staying put agreements. Only 2 participants out of the 23 on the Care Experience Graduates Project had staying put agreements in place. So the recommendations to local authorities at a glance relate to these 3 key areas. So for housing stability, there is a recommendation to implement guarantor schemes and to extend holiday payments to care experienced graduates. In the area of financial support, it's to implement a graduate bursary, just as some higher education institutions do. As I mentioned before, very few universities are offering that. I've only come across a couple. And extending horizons by incorporating graduate plans and housing planning into the pathway planning process, and creating repositories of key information for care experienced people that are relevant to them when they're graduating, and also signposting to relevant services and organisations. So the first one, for guarantor schemes, this was the recommendation that appeared in the report, to implement guarantor schemes as part of their standard offer to enable care experienced graduates to access private rented housing in the immediate post-graduation period. Now, this was quite difficult for many participants that they didn't have a guarantor. So as they were coming up to graduate from universities and looking around for private rented accommodation, they didn't have this guarantor, so it was constraining their options. As for the next recommendation, This is offering summer bursary payments. So to extend summer bursary payments to cover the period between undergraduate degree completion and the start of taught postgraduate studies. So quite a few participants were really keen on progressing to the postgraduate level, and this was because a number of them wanted to access professions that necessitated a postgraduate degree. But there was a period in between leaving their undergraduate degree and starting a postgraduate degree where they weren't going to have an income or housing available. So for graduate bursaries, as I've mentioned, a small number of universities do offer these, but one of the recommendations is to offer a graduate bursary in addition to the higher education bursary to contribute to some activities to promote access to a greater range of employment opportunities. So this could be vouchers for driving lessons and travel grants to attend interviews or a place of work until care experience graduates receive their first wage. So the driving lessons point is quite interesting. A few participants explained how the kinds of jobs they were wanting to do necessitated a driving license, and others mentioned how it would extend the scope, so the range of the jobs they could apply for if they could get themselves about in a car, rather than being constrained by public transports. But they had not had the opportunity to learn to drive previously due to issues with their care history, things being quite turbulent and not having the financial support or resources to do so. And a number of participants explained that, once I leave university, and even if I get a job straight away, I still have to wait a month for my first wage. And what am I going to do during that time? So this is where the travel grants to attend interviews or a place of work until they received their first wage came in. Now, for pathway planning, one of the recommendations was around incorporating graduate planning into care experienced higher education students' pathway plans. This should identify and provide the requisite information, advice and guidance to support care experienced soon-to-be graduates in understanding what their immediate next steps should be. Understanding what next steps should be was something that was raised a lot, with participants explaining, well, I need to finish this degree and get a house and find a job, and they just was unsure on how to organise this and what steps they should be taking now and what steps they should be taking later. I've included a quote from one of the participants, Jade, here, and she explains that how a pathway plan stopped being updated when she turned 18, and she did her own pathway plan at age 20. She explains, I'm now 22 and I haven't had it updated since I updated it myself. So having this graduate planning implemented into pathway plans would be very beneficial for care experienced people, so they could understand, okay, what do my short-term, medium-term, long-term steps need to be? And the recommendation around creating repositories was really tied into signposting and providing enhanced information, advice and guidance. So the recommendation in the report is to create and provide access to a repository of information to assist care experienced graduates in accessing employment. This could include links to the Care Leaver Covenant opportunities pages, charitable organisations that offer grants to help afford essential items, and employability related schemes offered by charities. In the actual report, I have provided footnotes on various charitable organisations that could be signposted to here as well. I'm going to provide a couple of examples here of what it looks like to fall off the cliff edge when this support isn't received. So this quote is taken from the second phase of the research from a participant she was a sports science graduate. And she'd had a lot of support from her university. She had stayed in a university accommodation through the summer after she graduated, but when she left, she didn't have anywhere to go. And she wound up being homeless for 8 days after she left her university accommodation. And by homeless, I don't necessarily mean sofa surfing. She was on the streets homeless. And I, of course, asked her about, what did you do to find support? Did you contact the local authority? And she explains that she wasn't getting the support immediately. She explains in this quote that she wasn't a priority. She states, I wasn't elderly, I wasn't pregnant, And there was another reason, but I can't remember, to be honest. But yeah, I just didn't meet their criteria in that sense. I told them I'm care experienced. I have been within that local authority. I have nowhere to go. They just kept refusing. I had to go to the police station and stay there. So like park benches and at the council, there's times when I like bus hopped and stuff. So Deirdre had a very difficult time when she'd left university. So this really shows that cliff edge. But I wanted to also provide an example of when it goes right, because I don't like being all doom and gloom. So one participant, Geraldine, felt very well supported, not just by her university, but also by her local authority. And she explained, as a care leaver, you get your accommodation paid for by my council, anniversary and stuff. And like one of my anxieties was not having money. So I kind of learned to manage my money and I saved quite a bit. I have kind of the support around me. I have my partner, I have my council. And it's like when I think about it that way, there's nothing that could go wrong. No one around me would like leave me to be, homeless or whatever. So this is a good example of when it can go right. Geraldine felt very secure. As she explains, there's nothing that could go wrong. No one would allow me to be homeless. And ideally, and I'm sure those of you viewing this video would agree, that's ideally where we need to get care experience graduates on the whole to feel this sense of security as they're leaving university. As many non-care experienced people would experience this sense of stability and security through having a parental home and a family to return to or draw on for support. So what can we do now with this information? Of course, funding constraints have a significant impact on what can be offered. So some of these recommendations that I've shown, I know that there will be a number of thoughts around, we can't afford that, we don't have resource, we don't have budget, completely understandable. But what is more feasible than in the absence of additional funding? So incorporating discussions of graduate plans, including housing options, into pathway planning, and what steps need to be taken to access these, that can be achieved there, so that we're not having situations like Deirdre, who didn't have anywhere to go and was homeless after her degree. That providing a repository of key information is quite a cheap thing to do, so that care experience graduates can access it and find out where they can go for different opportunities and what other information they can draw on and what other forms of support are available to them. And signpost current care experience higher education students to their institution's career services well in advance of graduation. This can be helpful. I have included quite a few recommendations in the report targeted at career services in universities as well, to essentially provide a bit more hands-on support with things like CV writing, where exactly to look for jobs. And finally, if you wish to contact me or learn more about the project, please do go to my website, which is drzoebaker.co.uk. You can email me on zoe.baker@york.ac.uk, and I'm also active on Twitter under the handle ZS_Baker. Thank you so much for your time.